This.
Good morning. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening still to the second part of our presentation here. The purpose of this presentation that will follow is not primarily that the the presentation is about EU development aid and abortion, but it is not primarily about that the EU can justify to fund abortion and sexual and reproductive health programs, but to show that there is actually absolutely no obligation to do so. The discussion we want to take place is whether or not the EU wants to improve its development aid and public health policies by excluding abortion from its funding and thus raise the ethical standard of the EU as a whole. Now, let me begin by addressing some possible misunderstandings about claims of the European Citizen Initiative, One of Us. There are certain claims that have created some confusion about the goals and objectives of the initiative in the public debate. With regards to development aid, let me begin by saying what the ECI One of Us does not call for. One of Us does not call for a ban of abortion. One of Us does not want to interfere with national legislation on abortion. And One of Us does not call for a decrease of development aid, especially with regards to women's health. Instead, the European Citizen Initiative, One of Us, does call for development aid and public health policies that respect the dignity of every human being, including women and the unborn. One of Us does call for development aid that helps to improve medical infrastructure, especially in the field of reproductive care. One of Us does call for sexual and reproductive health that helps women and men to have healthy sexual lives and to receive the medical care needed for safe childbearing. And finally, One of Us calls for an end of EU funding of abortion as a sexual and reproductive health service. These claims are perfectly in line with the legal framework of the European Union, but let us have a look at the legal framework and the current practice of the EU of funding abortions abroad. Regulation 1567/2005 states, no support should be given under this regulation to incentives to encourage sterilization or abortion. When cooperation measures are implemented, the decisions adopted at the ICPD, the Cairo Conference on Population and Development, according to which abortion should in no case be promoted as a means of family planning, must be rigorously observed. Regulation 1905/2006 says sexual and reproductive health must be within the definition of the ICPD. Now, this has been confirmed several times. I just quote from one written question that the Commission has answered, question H072903. And I just quote from this, the European Union has never adopted an alternative definition of reproductive health to that given in the programme of action of the ICPD, which makes no reference to abortion. End of quote. Now, besides the fact that the Commission has confirmed that ICPD programme of action does not refer to abortion, let me clarify some points regarding the ICPD and the EU funding of development aid. First, the ICPD programme of action is not a legally binding instrument. Second, we do not want to discuss here primarily the question of ICPD allowing the EU to fund abortions where legal. Third, the point is not if ICPD prohibits abortion, but that it does not oblige the Commission to finance abortion. Such an obligation does not exist for two reasons. First, it is not in the statement of ICPD. ICPD doesn't contain such a statement. And secondly, if such a statement existed, it would be anyway legally not binding. So the conclusion of that is that ICPD for our question here today is irrelevant. Yet, the European Union finances very generously projects that explicitly includes abortion, both where legal and in some cases where illegal, and I will explain that in a minute. I will focus on two main receivers of EU funding on sexual and reproductive health programs, IPPF, International Planned Parenthood Federation, and MSI, Mary Stopes International. This is, of course, only a part of the funds going into development of sexual and reproductive health. It is not exhaustive, certainly, but the examples of IPPF and MSI illustrate well the point we want to make here today. Both organizations have received and continue to receive large parts of their funding from the European Union's development aid and public health budgets for projects related to sexual and reproductive health. IPPF's financial statements of 2012 reveal an overall income of $144 million. Of course, that's the global budget. And the statement says that its main source is government funding. A large part does come from the EU here. Mary Stopes International's financial statements show for 2011, 2012, etc., also that the primary sources are, I quote, government reimbursements for fees. Again, a large part from the European Union. Both organizations claim to work for and support sexual and reproductive health, but both explicitly include not only the provision, but the promotion of abortion and post-abortive care in the list of services they provide under that rubric. I quote from their websites, MSI's core strategy include increasing access, I insist on that, to both surgical and medical abortion where permitted. Second, providing training to mid-level providers in medical abortion and manual vacuum aspiration techniques. IPPF's core strategy include training medical officers, nurses and paramedics to provide manual vacuum aspiration. We will see in a second what that is. And medical abortion. And IPPF in their annual report 2012 to 2013 state, I quote, the number of abortion-related services increased by 31% in 2012. Neither IPPF nor MSI have followed the international norm or indeed the European standard when formulating their definitions on sexual and reproductive health. Now, some of the funds allocated to MSI, I just quote some numbers, there have been at least 12.5 million grant income from the EU in the years 2005 and 2010. Of course, these numbers need to be updated, but we have absolutely no indication that these funds have decreased, quite on the contrary. So this has been only the funds for new projects, not the ongoing ones. These totals were calculated by us on the basis of annual reports, project reports, submitted by MSI to the European Commission. The European Commission appears to have financed many more MSI projects on sexual and reproductive health, but refused to disclose information on those projects, citing MSI's commercial interests as a justification for the refusal to us. This reaction of the European Commission is surprising, given that Mary Stopes International is not a commercial entity, but a UK-based charity registered by Charity Commission for England and Wales under the number 265543, with an income of around £130 million a year. Mary Stopes International states in its financial statement reports the following grant income from the European Union. It amounts to about 18 million euros for the years 2005 to 2009, which is more than double of the numbers stated in the MSI reports made available to us by the European Commission. IPPF has also received considerable funding, but an accurate figure of the total amount is impossible to provide, given that only 4 reports were disclosed to us by the European Commission. Now, let me quote very quickly And just as examples, of course this is not exhaustive, some examples of projects. I begin with projects carried out by Mary Stopes International. The Cambodia project began in 2006 and onwards. MSI praises itself to have provided and performed 6,807 abortions in 4 provinces of Cambodia. The Bangladesh project. This project began in 2005 and received some 745,000 euros in support from the European Commission. In the final report for the project, MSI reported that it had successfully provided menstrual regulations, which I will explain in a second, to some 12,300 patients. Interestingly, MSI never defines the term menstrual regulations in its reports, and we will see in a minute what it is. A third project, the project in Papua New Guinea, began in 2005, supported by 730,000 euros from the European Commission, a sum representing 85% of the total cost of the project. Now, Papua New Guinea is a country where abortion is legal only to save the life of the mother. Yet, MSI reported that it was providing training to individuals to perform induced surgical abortions. MSI also trained individuals with regards to proper techniques of administrating abortions through manual vacuum aspirations. Just 2 examples on IPPF projects. A project of Bolivia, Guatemala and Peru. All these countries have very strict abortion laws outlawing abortion except for health reasons. During the course of this project, a project began in 2005, to which the EU provided more than 1,700,000 in financial support. IPPF and its member organizations distributed 1,102 emergency contraception units. Now, IPPF has never defined what were the precise contents of these units and what it meant by emergency contraception, but when you know a little bit, when you're familiar with the field, the term, you know that the term is likely to include such abortifacients as progestin, mifepristone and misoprostol pills. All of them have the aim to induce a chemical abortion in case of pregnancy. Second project, during the course of the Bangladesh project of IPPF began in 2005 with 1.48 million euros of funding of the European Commission. IPPF reported that it also freely provided menstrual regulation services to 12,278 of the clients who came to the clinic seeking assistance. Now, what we see repeatedly in these projects is menstrual regulation is used and financed by the European Union in countries where abortion is illegal or restricted. This is not only legally problematic, but this is an approach to development aid that we find highly questionable and that doesn't reflect great respect for the dignity of both the woman and the unborn. Now let me just explain, as promised, I think that is important in this debate, what is menstrual regulation? The meaning of menstrual regulation, although initially unclear, can be quickly elucidated through reviews of IPPF's and Mary Stopes' own websites. According to IPPF, a menstrual regulation is a process that empties the uterus in which an embryo has likely already implanted by use of a manual vacuum aspirator. In the eyes of IPPF and MSI, this differs from a surgical abortion only because it is performed intentionally before the official administration of a pregnancy test, meaning that the pregnancy has never been verified, not meaning that there was no pregnancy. The actual process of a menstrual regulation is completed when an administrator, usually a doctor or a midwife, but it can be a family member or the woman herself, inserts a cannula of a manual vacuum aspirator through the dilated cervix of the woman and pulls back on the piston in order to create high-powered suction inside the uterus. The suction created is so violent that it normally empties the uterus of all its contents, including the fetus, placenta, and the uterine lining. Typically, before 12 weeks, the fetus is sufficiently soft and the suction sufficiently strong as to completely dismember and deconstruct the fetus, enabling it to pass through a very narrow cannula, leaving only a mass of undefiable bloody tissue in the piston. Even though a 10-week fetus is readily recognizable as human, the process of sucking it through the cannula either so disfigures the fetus to be unrecognizable, or it is quickly and quietly discarded. That means that in countries, and this is why this is important, in countries like Bangladesh, where the penal code requires physical evidence that abortion has occurred, the perpetrators can avoid punishment, so the law can be circumvented by making it virtually impossible for the prosecutors to obtain proof. This is the same process, menstrual regulation is the same process than surgical abortion, what the medical field calls surgical abortion, except that a menstrual regulation is performed on a woman who suspects rather than knows that she is pregnant. The Guttmacher Institute estimates that menstrual regulations account for more than half of all abortions, for example in Bangladesh, they have numbers on almost all the countries, and that more than 730 abortions occur annually in that country.
Vous acheminez votre conclusion, s'il vous plaît?
Une minute. According to MSI's own website, MSI performs more than 50,000 menstrual regulations every year, and many of those, as our findings show, were administered using Commission's funding. The Guttmacher Institute does not hesitate to count menstrual regulations as abortions. I now just jump to the end. We do indeed see a serious problem here with regards to the practice and attitude to the practice to attribute EU funds to menstrual regulation that is often praised for its usefulness in circumventing the law. Indeed, Malcolm Potts, the creator of the manual vacuum aspirator, the first male doctor as MSI, the first medical director of IPPF, praised menstrual regulation by declaring, and I quote, "There will be no proof of pregnancy unless the tissue removed from the uterus is subjected to microscopic examination. The point is of crucial importance in countries where abortion is illegal." Conclusion. The question for us today is not whether the EU has is not primarily, although that's a very interesting question, of course, whether the EU has in the past financed abortions, legally or not. We have never heard a clear dementi, though. We are looking into the future, not into the past today. If the Commission wants to continue financing abortion, it should say so without any ambiguity. Today, Commissioner Piebalgs, is your occasion to make a clear and honest statement, and it is a yes or no question. If the Commission finds that development aid funds should correspond to a higher ethical standard, respond better to the needs of women, and respect the dignity of every human person equally, if the Commission finds that development aid thus should not fund abortions, then it is certainly not difficult. Okay, my last sentence. So if you find all of this worthy to be regarded today, then it is certainly not difficult to make a legislative proposal to that effect along the lines of the proposal we have submitted. Thank you.